IDW's Transformers comics were some of the first comics that I ever read, for better or worse. I was particularly hooked on the series More Than Meets the Eye, which doesn't completely hold up on a reread.
What? What the fuck?
But I still have a fondness for it, considering it's what got me into Transformers in the first place, which I've been hooked on ever since.
Then again, maybe a bit too hooked, since I've seen shit from this franchise that no one should. But as I've grown older, I've had trouble finding anything in the series that interests me. It's either too kiddie, dog shit, or both. But recently, that all changed with Skybound's new Transformers series. The comic is written by Daniel Warren Johnson, who also illustrated the first 6 issues, and it serves as a darker and more serious retelling of the original cartoon. It's also part of Skybound's wider Energon universe, which consists of this comic, 2 G.I. Joe series, and a comic based on an original story called Void Rivals. Also, for the sake of going into detail as to why I like this series, this video will contain spoilers. So if you haven't already, I would highly recommend going and reading the comic for yourself before proceeding any further. But for those of you who have read the comic, or just don't give a shit about spoilers, buckle up, because I want to tell you why I think this is the best Transformers comic of all time. The basic premise of the series is that 2 kids named Spike and Carly discover the dormant Transformers on Earth and witness them being awakened. Afterwards, they help the Autobots escape from their enemies and are drawn into their war. From there, Optimus Prime and his Autobots try and retake their ship the Ark, while also protecting their human friends from the Decepticons led by the sadistic Starscream. While it's a basic setup, what really brings this comic to life for me is its characters. After seeing the live-action movies depict him as a violent psycho, you know, the opposite of what Optimus Prime is supposed to be,
Planet. Give me your faith.
it's nice to see a version of him that's a heroic figure dedicated to protecting the innocent. I mean, he's definitely willing to kill Decepticons to protect his friends, but he doesn't ever come off as bloodthirsty or crazy. He also has some of the best interactions with the human cast, which really helps to flesh him out more and show just how much this war has taken its toll on him. He feels a bit similar to Batman, where you get a sense that he's lost a lot and just wants to make sure that no one else does. The other Autobot lead is Cliffjumper, who's an interesting case since he's pretty likable, but he also doesn't really feel like Cliffjumper. See, in the wider TF mythos, Cliffjumper is usually depicted as a more violent and insubordinate type of character. The kind of bot who wouldn't hesitate to kill an unarmed foe. But here, he's a lot more similar to Bumblebee in that he's a pretty friendly and jovial guy, which doesn't really embody any of his previous traits. In fact, he feels like the opposite most of the time. But again, he is likable, and he has some pretty good character moments throughout the comic, so I can't complain too much. But considering the series opened with Bumblebee getting killed off, it kinda makes me wonder why they even bothered. Who knows, maybe he'll evolve more into the Cliffjumper I know and love, but then again, that does seem like something you'd grow out of rather than into. The other Autobots haven't had as much page time yet, but they still get their moments to shine. Whether it be Ratchet debating with Optimus about risking his life to save the humans, or Jazz making his grand entrance to save the day. Or Beachcomber getting shot because he's a pussy-ass pacifist. I'm just kidding, I love Beachcomber. Even if he is a filthy coward. I'm really digging the Autobot cast so far, and I was honestly pretty surprised to say the same about the human cast as well. Usually, the human characters in most TF media are a major issue for me. Most of the time, they're annoying, not very interesting, and worst of all, they steal the spotlight from the characters you actually came here to see. But so far, that's not the case with this comic. None of them are deep or anything like that, but they're all likable enough, and they feel like they actually contribute to the story as opposed to just being the token audience surrogate. Spike, as of now, is the least developed of the bunch, mainly because he goes into a coma in issue 3. However, this moment is integral to his father Sparkplug and Optimus Prime's character development. So even if he was absent for most of the first arc, it still resulted in some really great character moments. And as of issue 7, he's just woken up, and it seems like they're building to something pretty interesting happening between him and Prime. So I'm looking forward to seeing how his character evolves throughout the series. Carly has also begun to get more development as of late. Her father is killed by Starscream in issue 1, and afterwards she ends up forming a bond with Cliffjumper. However, that bond deteriorates when he hesitates to kill Starscream, which ends up putting Carly in danger. This causes her to become more erratic and emotional, and she actually ends up injuring RC while trying to kill the captive Skywarp. She ends up realizing the error of her ways and forms a closer bond with RC. Wow, a female character who's flawed has to acknowledge said flaws and try and improve on them. Disney, are you taking notes? But I would say by far the best human character in this comic, and probably one of my favorite characters in the whole series, is Spike's father, Sparkplug. He sees Carly's father and his best friend, Dave, get killed by Starscream, which causes him to fear and resent all Transformers and go on a crusade to end them. However, when his son is wounded by his own militia and Optimus risks his life to save him, it makes him realize that he and the Autobots aren't that dissimilar. This all culminates with him sacrificing himself by giving his life force over to the Matrix of Leadership to revive a wounded Prime, in a similar way to how Optimus risked his life to save Spike earlier in the story. It's a really solid arc, and I think Sparkplug is one of, if not the best human characters we've gotten in the history of Transformers. Although, to be fair, considering the competition, that's not saying too much. But what really makes the human cast in this comic work is that it never feels like they take the spotlight away from the Transformers. They really shine as supporting cast to help humanize and flesh out the Autobots through their interactions with them, which are some of my favorite moments in the series so far. And one of my other favorite parts of this series has been the Decepticons. Now, what's really interesting is that while some of them, like Starscream and Skywarp, are depicted as cartoonishly evil sadists who just want to make people suffer, there's a lot of hints through dialogue that there's more to the Decepticon cause than meets the eye. See what I did there? Case in point, while Soundwave is definitely evil, he's not mindlessly evil like Starscream. In fact, he ends up calling out Starscream for just wanting mindless chaos and having no real goal. Which leads to one of my favorite moments in the series where the two duel for leadership. Which, needless to say, does not go well for Screamer. Like I alluded to earlier, there's a lot of dialogue that hints that there's more to the Decepticons than just wanting to kill all the Autobots and conquer the universe, with many of them referring to the Autobots as either naive or outright evil on multiple occasions. Now, again, this is coming from a group who won't hesitate to kill anyone who gets in their way, but it's still interesting to think that this conflict might be more complex than it seems. In fact, you could say that there's more than meets the—
This is bad comedy.
I mean, some of them, like Thundercracker, even outright object to the idea of killing humans. Which makes me think they might be using an old idea from the show where he would have become an Autobot, which I think could be really cool. Just don't be cringe like IDW and give him a fucking doggo. And even Starscream, who isn't particularly complex, is still fun to watch just because of how evil he is. He just wants to watch the world burn, kind of like a certain DC Comics villain that people just can't seem to shut the fuck up about these days. Moving on, one of my favorite parts of this comic is how the story and characters are brought to life through the phenomenal artwork. Now, I've seen a lot of people who aren't a fan of this grittier, looser style, and I get it, it's not for everyone. But personally, this is the exact kind of artwork I look for in modern comics. See, the art in most newer mainstream comics just doesn't do it for me. It's so clean and digital that it really feels lacking in any kind of character, and it almost feels AI generated in terms of how soulless it looks. In fact, some of it probably is. But here, you can see all the grungy details, the rich textures, and bright, vibrant colors that I just can't get enough of. All of the action is super dynamic and awesome, and there's so much detail in every panel, it's really impressive. I mean, just look at this page of the Ark being discovered compared to this new issue of Superman. Johnson's artwork just looks so much more lovingly crafted than a comic from DC, which has way more money behind it. And this just proves the point that bigger budget doesn't always equal better product. I remember being a bit worried because while Johnson drew the first 6 issues, he said he would be passing off art duties to focus fully on writing. Thankfully, the new artist, Jorge Corona, is pretty good. I don't like his style quite as much as Johnson's, and some of his faces look a little off. But overall, I would say I'm pretty happy with him as a successor, since his art has that same gritty feel and level of detail. Although, despite all my praises for this comic, I do have one major issue, and that is the huge amount of character death. Now look, I get it. It's a war story, and characters are gonna die, which I don't have a problem with. My problem is how many characters have been killed off in just 8 issues and how some of these deaths have been handled. Now, I think killing off Bumblebee was a wise move considering how much he's overused. But a better example of what I mean is in issue 5, where Reflector and Frenzy are revived only to be killed off instantly. I get it if you want to kill off a few characters for shock value or to show how powerful another character has become, but I think killing both of them right after they were introduced felt like a waste. Same with just having well-known characters like Blaster and Perceptor die in one-panel flashbacks. I mean, at that point, why not just use a generic? That being said, if the writer doesn't plan to do anything with them, I get why he wouldn't want to keep them around, and most of the characters who have been killed aren't super interesting, with a few exceptions. I just think killing off a lot of characters willy-nilly for shock value is cheap, and that they should probably tone it down a little bit. Although I will gladly take this over the last TF comic, which had so many fucking characters that I couldn't even keep track of who the main one was. Now, despite my few complaints, I do think this series is really great. It's got an engaging cast, great art, and it's pretty accessible to longtime fans and newcomers alike. I would highly recommend going and checking it out, and if you like it, consider giving the other Energon Universe comics a read too, since so far they've been good as well. Well, that's all for now, but if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. I'm G8Nate, and until next time, over and out.